lessons were the same in both congregations. I think she expected all fresh new readings, but you know, all around the world, those of us who use the Revised Common Lectionary are gathering in different church buildings to hear the same text read. That brings a kind of unity to our worship that I think we sometimes miss. So let's consider for a moment this morning that all around this world, people gather today and hear the same text. Let's imagine one specific community. They're gathered in a small log building. It's cozy inside, which is good, because although it is sunny there, it is 15 degrees. I'm talking about Arctic Village, Alaska. Did you know that the Gwich'in people, the native people of that region, have had the prayers of the Book of Common Prayer translated into the Gwich'in language since 1873? A long time. That's longer than my family's been in the Episcopal Church. I don't know about you, but that is a long time. The Gwich'in people have been faithful Episcopalians for a long time. One of the first Episcopal priests in the Gwich'in people, the Reverend Albert E. Tritt, got everybody together to build that log church that they're worshiping in this morning. It's this cozy log church to one side of the river. Now this summer, I met and heard somebody speak from the Gwich'in community. Her name is Bernadette Dementieff, and she spoke to us, all Episcopalians gathered at General Convention in Texas. She is Gwich'in. She's a leader in the community. She's the mother of 5, grandmother of 4. I was shocked to learn because she doesn't look like a grandmother to me. She is a very vibrant and wonderful woman. She has been busy going around and speaking to anyone who will listen about the way of her people, the way of the Gwich'in, speaking not only to the Episcopal Church, but also to folks at the United Nations. And here is why. Here is why she travels around, and here is why Bernadette is talking to anyone who will listen. The ancestral lands of her Gwich'in people follow the migratory route of the Porcupine River caribou herd. They call their caribou herd the Porcupine Caribou Herd, which is confusing. They are not hunting porcupine. They are hunting caribou, called the Porcupine Caribou Herd. You with me? Porcupine River Caribou Herd. They hunt the caribou, and that is how they have survived for thousands upon thousands of years. Bernadette says, we are caribou people. We are connected to the caribou. The caribou people, like Bernadette, are fighting to preserve the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge from drilling, that birthing ground of their caribou herd. It is a sacred land where the caribou gives birth. It is a sacred land, and people are never allowed to go there. The Gwich'in will not dare tread into the sacred birthing ground of their caribou herd. You are to stay away so the caribou can continue doing what they have done for thousands upon thousands of years, unaffected by human beings. Even when human beings are really hungry and they know they could hunt there, they do not go in that place. It is where all life begins for the Gwich'in family. It is sacred. Now, every major oil company has an interest in that sacred land. Our nation depends on fossil fuel. We depend on fossil fuel. And so it becomes very hard to protect sacred land from drilling. But protect it, the Gwich'in struggle to do. Since the 1970s, the Gwich'in have fought to keep those sacred birthing grounds free from drilling. They know that once drilling begins, even exploration for drilling begins, the caribou's lives will be changed. They will be pushed out of that space. thereby pushing out the Gwich'in and their way of life. Caribou hunting provides 80% of the Gwich'in diet for the whole year. It is a cornerstone of their identity and their culture. They subsist completely on traditional hunting and fishing in the ways of their ancestors. Now, you may already know this fact. It's related, this fact. But I'm going to tell it to you in case it is not abundantly apparent. This fact about myself. I drive a car. Did you know that? Did you see me maybe driving in this morning and quickly parking so I could be here and try to be here on time? Coming from the other service? I drive a car. Many of you know exactly what my car looks like and could guess how many miles per gallon it gets. I drive a car. In fact, my mechanic, Woody, who I adore, says to me, Dina, you do a lot of driving. Right? And that car that I drive runs on fossil fuel, which you also know. So if I am faithful, if I am to be faithful to my ideals of abolishing injustice and systemic oppression, I must also face how my lifestyle impacts my brothers and sisters who worship this morning in that old log church. I must face my own fossil fuel gluttony square in the eye. The alternative of that, which is how I operate most days, is to divorce myself from my relationship with that part of the body of Christ, our Gwich'in brothers and sisters who gather this morning to break bread and sing hymns just like us in that old log church. Their way of life is threatened. Their survival is threatened. Their spiritual connection to the land and caribou herd and water is threatened. I must not, if I am to be faithful, divorce myself from their struggle to protect their land and their way of life. I believe that when I know better, I must do better. I hate that part of knowing, what it means to be an adult, right? When you know better, you got to do better, and that's hard. I must take a stand, not only by standing in solidarity against drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge through signing some petition. That's fairly easy. I could do that today and then get back in my car and drive anywhere I want. It's easy to sign a petition. It's important, but it's kind of easy. I must also change my way of life. I must connect to my own greed and desire, my own reluctance to live in more sustainable ways. I must face my own consumption of fossil fuels and not turn away from the root cause within, which is my own way of life. A way of life that preferences what is easy, what is convenient, what serves my own needs best and fastest. It's hard not to divorce myself from this truth. I must pause here and ask you, is it funny that I'm using the word divorce in a new way? Is it funny that I'm talking about divorce but haven't mentioned marriage yet? Were you expecting when we read the gospel that I was going to talk about marriage and divorce? As the baptized people of God, we take vows to live in community with one another, to preserve the union of our connection, which is kind of like a very large marriage. We take vows, right? And the word divorce is a word that comes to us from an old French combination of root words meaning to turn away from. To divorce is to turn away from something. Now, because I am greedy for the easy lifestyle, I am prone to this kind of divorce, this kind of turning away from something, to turning away from hard truths that will require me to change my ways, to live differently. I like what's easy, and facing this truth is hard work. Now let's talk a little bit about about divorce and marriage, because I don't want to leave that hanging out there, the Pharisees indeed asked Jesus about divorce in our text today. And they're talking about the kind of divorce that's related to marriage. Now, this is a total setup for Jesus. Because if Jesus answers with a hard-line anti-divorce response, he may end up losing his head. Just like John the Baptizer lost his head when he took a hard line against divorce, which really upset someone important, Princess Herodias. According to the renowned historian of the era named Josephus, who wrote his history of the time at about the same time as the Gospels were being written, here's what he said about Princess Herodias. She took upon herself to confound the laws of our country and divorced herself from her husband while he was alive and married instead Herod Antipas. So she divorced one man and then married the ruler Herod, which is how we meet her in the Gospels. It was her daughter Salome from the first marriage that danced so well that she could then earn the head of John the Baptist on a platter and give it to her mother. And her mother, Princess Herodias, was enraged by John's condemnation of her divorce from her first marriage and her second marriage. So that's how they are setting up Jesus for a trap. They ask him about divorce. They think he might go the way of John the Baptizer if he answers in a way that enrages the Princess Herodias again. And that would take care of Jesus for the Pharisees, without them dirtying their hands. But Jesus does not fall into their trap. Instead, he quotes some Hebrew scriptures back at them, and then he turns his focus to the heart of his ministry, which is never really about morality and if we're doing things exactly right, but getting into the heart of our existence as the beloved people of God, which is focusing on the needs of the vulnerable. In Jesus' day, Princess Herodias was probably the only woman anyone knew about who divorced her husband and then made out better afterwards. That was usually not what was going on. Usually the women were being divorced by their husbands, and they were left to struggle on the fringes of society without income or support. Their economic options limited, facing danger outside of the protected household, divorced women were quickly in dire economic and social straits. Their children, too, if the husband turned out both wife and children, which was happening. Jesus cares for the well-being of people, especially vulnerable people. And Jesus advocates for households and families and communities to fulfill their shared responsibilities to one another. And Jesus then says, "Let the little children come to me." Children. Children were really vulnerable in Jesus' day. Many did not make it to their second birthday. They were so prone to illness. So many died young. And there they are, being lifted into Jesus' arms, an example for us of how we must become welcoming and even vulnerable to enter the way of life, the kingdom of God, that Jesus calls us into. I am humbled when I think that my own way of life adversely impacts the way of life of another person. To become like a little child, I must lean into the arms of Jesus and be really vulnerable about this truth. It requires some humility to say things to you this morning like, I'm afraid. I'm afraid to explore what a smaller environmental footprint might mean for my lifestyle. I don't know how to do my job, how to raise my family without using so much non-renewable energy. I simply don't really know how to do that. It's also vulnerable to admit to you that I don't like thinking I've contributed in any way to the threat facing our Gwich'in Episcopal sisters and brothers in Alaska. I naturally want to turn away from them, to look away from any possible connection between my way of life and the destruction of theirs. Makes me vulnerable to admit that I am afraid and I don't know. It's vulnerable to say these things aloud. And I invite you to vulnerably, in the safety of the arms of Jesus in which we gather, to turn and face those ways in which we might be participating in the destruction of the environment, in the destruction of the way of life of the Gwich'in people, and others who live more closely to the land than most of us do. We are stewards of this land and water around us. We steward our actions. We can make changes to live better once we know better, to care for this beautiful earth more effectively. Here at St. Andrews, you may or may not know that we have moved our utility contract to utilize wind power here at the parish house and at Union Chapel. We are aiming to be good stewards when we know how we can do better. We are careful here at St. Andrews to use resources with great care, working through teams of leaders and volunteers and experts in our community to care for our buildings and our grounds, to care for our financial resources that each of you offer each week in the plate or through pledged contributions. To offer a place where the whole community can gather and pray and sing and grow and share in the fellowship of God's people, all God's people, gathered here and gathered elsewhere. A place where it can be safe to explore this hard stuff without divorcing our hearts and looking away from others. I want to close this sermon by thanking the many stewards of our resources here at St. Andrews. I want to pause and thank the stewards who serve on the vestry. Please raise your hand if you are a member of our vestry or have ever served on the vestry of this congregation. Keep your hands up and listen. As members of the vestry, you have stewarded this resource for other people, and we thank you. You can put your hands down. I want to recognize those who have ever served or are serving now on our finance committee, who steward the resources of this congregation so faithfully shared. Raise your hands. I want to thank you for serving on the finance committee. You are faithful stewards in this congregation. You can put your hands down. How about our buildings and grounds teams, the folks that get out here and weed and take care of the grounds and install energy-saving lights and devices throughout the building? Raise your hand if you have served on our buildings and grounds teams over the years. Please raise your hand. Thank you. Thank you for serving and stewarding that resource. How about folks who count the offering on Monday morning? That's a way we steward our resources that most of us don't even realize happens. There are these volunteers who gather and give up their time, hopefully just an hour, hour and a half, but sometimes, like after the pig and jig or the end of the year, they spend many hours faithfully stewarding the resources in a hands-on way so that this congregation can serve the community. Who has ever served as a counter in this congregation? We thank you and honor you for stewarding our resources. How about our creation care team? Raise your hand if you serve on our creation care team. I know there's going to be a hand here and there. Many of you, thank you for raising your hands. You can put them down. Gather to deepen our knowledge about how our parish can be better stewards and live more faithfully in creation. And we thank you. All of you, all of the volunteers who steward in all of these ways and more, offer great care to our community, allowing us to continually ask those questions that make us feel vulnerable, like, how can all of us reduce our environmental footprint as a parish? And then how can we invite others to share in this space so that we can maximize its footprint and its usefulness to the greater community? Humbly and vulnerably, I invite each one of you to turn toward exploration of how to live well and sustainably in this life we have together on earth. I invite you to consider not only fossil fuel consumption and your own gluttony, but I want you to also consider some unlimited resources. The unlimited resource of human ingenuity and will, the unlimited resource of God's grace as we learn and grow together. We have some powerful, unlimited resources among us. As we wean ourselves away from what is excessive and easy, let us rely on those unlimited resources of human ingenuity and God's grace. And I invite you to share what you know already, the expertise you already have from your own household and work, to help all of us understand the best ways available to live in right relationship with the land and the water and all of God's people. People like our Gwich'in brothers and sisters gathered this morning in that old log church. And our neighbors right here in the Glenwood area. Let us open our arms like Jesus in invitation to the learning and the growth and all of our brothers and sisters.